of a number of events and individuals that are very much part of the city's radical history. In World War I, the associate librarian was basically fired from her job for refusing to buy war bonds to support World War I. And as you probably know, World War I was a very controversial war, especially for American radicals. Many people went to jail. In fact, the head of the Socialist Party, Eugene Debs, was in Atlanta Penitentiary for advocating resistance to the intervention in World War I by his government. So Louise Hunt was a victim of what we would call the Red Scare around the time of World War I. But remember that on the other side was the old Elks Hall, which was the site of the Federal Theater Project during the New Deal days in the 1930s. It was a time of a serious depression, and the government at that time used public funds to support cultural events around the country. They supported painters, the WPA Painters Project. They built Timberline Lodge and, of course, all of the craftsmen. And they had a theater project which brought fairly radical plays, like One Third of a Nation, to cities, including Portland, and they hired local actors who were, of course, out of work for that purpose. And the theater is now part of the Grosvenor Hotel, but it's just the backside of it. It's not worth going around for another. In front of what used to be French's Restaurant. French's Restaurant. The significance of that is that it was across the street from where your union started here in Portland. This is the original ILA hiring hall that if you look, for example, on page 134 of the Red Guide, you'll see a bunch of people standing with the sign, an injury to one, it's an injury to all. And they're standing right in front of those windows where it says left. There's also some other photographs of the first day of the great 1934 strike, when this street was full of hundreds of longshoremen. And they were preventing scabs from being loaded into police wagons and taken down to the docks. So it was one of the real important, significant sites of that 34 strike. Of course, the local aid, I mean, it was the ILA in 1934, and of course it became the ILWU when the members voted to join the CIO in 1937. And it was still the headquarters there. Then they moved up to what is now McMenamins Mission Theater, and now, of course, to the much newer hall on Front Avenue.
So did Murnane, is that his name? Did he die at the McMenamins spot?
Yeah.
Is that where he died?
Exactly, yeah. We'll get to Murnane and see more. Put on what they call race films. Films that were made for black audiences. And there was also a musical revue called Harlem Mania that was used to raise money for the Scottsboro Boys and the Vernon Jordan case, both of which are detailed in the Red Guide. But basically they were issues where racism was a factor in court cases. The Marine Workers Industrial Union, which was a communist union, played a role in that strike. And this is where their headquarters were. And unlike the headquarters of the ILA, they were continually raided by the Portland police and their members arrested. So they were considered much more dangerous at the time, because after all they were rebels. And they were in effect saying that the ILA was run by conservatives. So there was an issue in that strike that right here where now Street Leaps has an office, were the offices of the Wobbly, the IWW, in the years before World War I. There at the Union Gospel Mission's new building was Kurt's Donut Shop, which was a hangout during the 1934 strike for the more radical organizers of the Union, including the Marine workers that we just went by there. And there's actually the Red Guide is going to have a second new edition in a year or so, which will include a very significant painting by a San Francisco painter who was here during the 34 strike and who painted from memory the interior of the donut shop on a rainy evening with important local radicals depicted in the picture. Depression, calling for jobs and public employment. And it eventually, of course, became a national movement back then. And this used to be the United Clothing Company was a clothing for loggers and mummers and fishermen and dockworkers. And they basically sold working class clothes. That's why it says Union Store on it. Okay, but it came from wood. Vandalism took place. This is what destroyed the memorial to Francis Murnane. I keep saying it was the only memorial to a labor leader in the entire state of Oregon. And they just blew it out. They're walking on what used to be the memorial. It's that floating dock dedicated to his memory. And what we're standing on now is construction that was put here for the Saturday market expansion. Originally, there were two what they called viewing piers and two sets of steps leading down to the Murnane Wharf and a plaque dedicated to local aid and the longshoremen of Portland that the city itself built in 1978. Harry Bridges came to dedicate it in that year, and it was of course for that local aid leader who somebody already pointed out died while chairing a meeting of local aid in 1965, I think. It's in the book. So that's all that's left. As you can see, it's completely deteriorated. And I suppose the worst part of this story is that local aid itself forgot about the war. They had no idea until the Oregonian put it on the front page that their own leader was commemorated here. So that tells you something about the need for labor history education among particularly the younger union members today. So that's why I think it's particularly good that Chris brought us together. The opposition were a bunch of vigilantes who were...
Yeah, I was doing a lot of... I was doing events or something. I was staying a lot back in the village, but I was looking at...
Elites.
Somebody asked me when they're going to do a bicycle tour.
Oh, that's...
Okay, the photograph is on page 233. It shows it as the Harbor Club, looking from, what was that? It was in my time, pretty much the only, obviously, gay bar in town. And there were all kinds of police raids associated with it, but normally they paid off the cops until, I think, what did it say, 1960 or something. They finally closed it down permanently. Now, Chris, did you make any arrangements to get that back?
I didn't know.
You want to, or?
I don't know. Well, I think it'd be fine to just go and have a drink. I don't know if anybody feels
well, except that, you know, there's just a long table and you really can sit together and discuss it. Maybe you can ask if you're those do that. They're
So yeah, that's where it all got started.
Well, that should be added to.
Yeah. Wait, what's that?
You need to add that to the torque.
What's in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
That's the plaque up there. Sneak in, bolt it to the wall.